Good evening, everyone. It's now 6:30, so we'll look to start the meeting. Yeah, are we okay to go? All technology is working or working as good as it can. Welcome to this Central Lancashire Strategic Planning Joint Advisory Committee. Obviously, there's some people here in the Council Chamber in Chorley and some people dialing in from home. So hopefully all the technology will work fine. And we'll try and get on with the agenda. So the first item is the appointment of chair for the meeting. Anyone to?
Thanks. Can I propose Councillor Alistair Bradley, please?
Thank you, Bill.
Could I second that, please?
Thank you. That's that Caleb. Yeah, Tomlinson. Yeah. Okay, that's been proposed and seconded. Any other proposals? If there are, they'll have to come and sit in the chair here and share it from here with me instead of me. Anybody against that? Please show, just for the process. Thank you very much for the honour. I am chairing this meeting, so I'm Alistair Bradley. I'm chair of the meeting for tonight. Obviously, we do have most people dialing in remotely. So if you want to speak, raise your hand. I think everybody knows the process now. Virtually, if I don't pick you up on the screen, I've got a screen in front of me, by all means shout up. But also, when you're not speaking, make sure your microphone's muted and your video's turned off as well if you're not speaking, because we have got some connection problems tonight if you are having problems connecting. Obviously, the members who are present in person, please respect the COVID security, keep your distance and all the rest of it. And also make sure mobile phones are turned off. There are no plans for any fire drill this evening, so if the fire alarm does go off here in the council chamber, it's for real. And follow me out of the door into the back, near to the police station, out the door we came in. First item after that then is any apologies for absence. I've got Councillor Borrow from Preston, and I understand Councillor Moss is substituting. I've also got Councillors Maxwell Scott and Edwards from Lancashire County Council, who have also given their apologies. Any other apologies we're aware of? Anybody else is aware of? In that case, then, the next item is the minutes of the last meeting, which was on the 25th of January, 2021, before the elections for many of us. So welcome back if you got through the elections. Somebody want to raise any issues with those minutes or propose them, etc.?
I'll propose them. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Anybody who was present at that meeting like to second those minutes?
I'll second those, Alistair, please.
Thank you. Anybody against accepting those minutes, please show their hands now. Nobody, so we'll take those minutes as agreed. Are there any declarations of interest from any members regarding any of the items we're discussing this evening that they need to raise now? Please do so. Okay. And then we're on to item 6, which is on pages 9 to 14 of your agenda papers, and that's the local plan update. And Carolyn, I think you're taking us through this local plan update, is that correct?
Yes, Chair, I am. Thank you. So I'll try and keep as succinct as I can, because I think 2 of the authorities have already heard this. Apologies for Preston who haven't yet, but I have the local plan working group next month. So the first update on here is about the local development scheme. And we are currently in the process of reviewing that. As previously noted at the last JAC, we did state that we would wait for the completion of work at the county level, which is being undertaken to inform the Greater Lancashire Plan, particularly that looking at the economic aspirations of Lancashire, as well as that on the environment and particularly the carbon assessments of Lancashire, findings of both of which will inform policy decisions in the local plan. There have also been a number of changes proposed to the planning system, and those have caused some delay as we've decided to tackle those and look at how the plan will address them. And that uncertainty has caused some delays. But taking all those into account, we are looking at how we can still achieve the 2023 deadline, which is government's target for local plans to be in place. And we are currently working on a revised plan for delivery with the focus of a preferred options consultation towards the end of 2021 and a revised LDS coming to members at the next JAC for approval. So as I say, one of the key issues that has been affecting us is the planning reforms. And I won't go into too much detail here because Zoe is touching on that in a much more detailed report. But one of the things there was the fact that the Queen's speech indicated that those reforms were going to be starting to come forward this year. However, no time frame is in place as to when they will be delivered and when new legislation will come into effect. So we are still committed to delivering the current local plan under the existing planning framework. And this is to ensure that we can meet the housing requirements for central Lancashire as a whole. One of the key changes proposed in the planning reforms is the introduction of zonal planning, so specifically the growth, renewal and protection areas. Now, there has been some debate in the recent paper that was published by government, but at the moment we are still understanding that is the route that they are going down. And as such, we feel that it's pertinent to ensure that the way we look at sites takes that into account, and we will locate land for future development under those categories of growth, renewal and protection. And this is to ensure that the work that we are doing will accord with the proposed changes that are coming forward, and hope that we will reduce any additional work that may be required should we need to move to the new system. On the preferred options itself, our main focus has been the site work, and we are nearly at completion of that, which is great. And this work has been looking at a number of issues which we are working with county education on, highways on, and also our flood risk colleagues to help us understand initially what any criteria are that might be affecting the deliverability of these sites and how they can be addressed. So should insufficient land be available when we complete this work, we may need to revisit the Sheila itself. So the Sheila, if you remember, is a methodology that we are applying to the existing site suggestions that were submitted to the councils. Once we've completed this work, we will discuss all the findings with the members, providing you information on the sites that are put forward in your location and how they will meet local needs. We're also working on reviewing and updating the vision's objectives, and we will bringing that to you in our next meeting, as well as looking at drafting policies. And our focus has been again on linking those to what the planning reforms are proposing. So work on the design had been started, but we are now looking at making sure that achieves the requirements that have been put through the recent design code. And we've also been looking at the spatial strategy and the focus of growth that we will be delivering. On evidence-based documents, the level 1 SFRA has been presented to you, and the findings of that, as I said, are being used, specifically that which is called the strategic recommendations. And I won't read all 5 options for you, but you can see them there. And those in the higher categories are those which the study suggests should not be taken forward. However, there may be some of those sites which are in the urban area or which are brownfield sites that we as officers would want to prioritise over land outside of the current Sheila methodology constraints. So to do that, we are looking at doing a level 2 SFRA, which will start this month, and that will be able to assess those sites and look at whether a sequential test is needed. We've also nearly completed work on the housing needs study, which is a partnership between Preston and Chorley, and this will also pick up on the same work that South Ribble have already undertaken. And this will then help identify housing needs for specific areas across Chorley and Preston, tying into that information which is already available for South Ribble. In addition to that, we've also commissioned some work through Hive Planning to undertake a review of densities that will be applied to specific site locations to be allocated in the local plan. And the purpose of this work was to provide the evidence base for any assumptions about capacity we use going forward, making sure there's a robust basis for any decisions that we make. And the output from this commission will then be used to inform those assumptions we apply against all the allocations to be taken forward. And once this work is complete, that will give us a full understanding then of whether or not we have sufficient land available to meet our housing needs. So this work is purely looking at housing densities. On the Central Transport Plan, we have meetings set up later this month to look at the approach for a county to start assessing any site options. And the aim of that work is to identify any issues from the options, how they'll be delivered, and any infrastructure requirements that may be required to make those sites sustainable. On climate change, as I touched on before, we want to be pulling on the work that County are doing on the carbon assessment for Lancashire. And that's also presenting a range of options for delivering the net zero aim, which all three councils have committed to through their climate change emergencies. And that will help us develop local policies. But work is also going on at the local level alongside this, and we are committed to doing additional work if necessary above that study. We're also working jointly with all planning authorities across Lancashire on climate change, because we recognise that this is above local issue and we need to work in partnership with these authorities if we are to deliver our combined goal on carbon neutrality. The councils are also actively working locally to support their commitments and are working with businesses and communities, as well as identifying steps that councils themselves can take to reduce their carbon emissions. We're also about to commission some work on local plan viability, and that will be a plan viability and community infrastructure levy review, and that will be a document that's produced alongside the plan. So that will be something that will start coming to this group in due course. We've also recently done a procurement exercise for the integrated assessment and habitats regulation assessment. We've now completed that appraisal process and it's just going through the internal systems for approval, and we are hoping to announce successful bidders in the next week. On duty to cooperate, again, this is something that we will continue to do throughout, but one thing that has been noted more recently is a number of requests that have been received for neighbouring authorities, and any responses prepared by individual councils to them. For instance, have you got any capacity to take our housing need, which is a common question asked, would have a direct impact on all three in the partnership. And as such, it has been agreed that those responses would be prepared with agreement from all three councils. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions on that update.
Thank you, Caroline, for that comprehensive update. Have we got any questions on any particular areas anybody would like to raise, discuss? I've got Councillor Morwood, is that? Oh, sorry, Peter Moss. Sorry, I can see an M, Peter. I couldn't see the second bit of it. Councillor Peter Moss. Peter, are you muted? No. I think you're muted still. Not looking good. Shall we? Sorry,
can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Thank you, Peter. Yeah. Carry on.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, thanks for that, Caroline. Just in terms of the housing needs study, I know we've written to all residents. I'm presuming in both Preston and Chorley, South of Wyoming already completed this. But clearly, what we are doing there is writing to people who already have a home, in effect, aren't we? And I just wondered, for those people who don't have a home, whose voice isn't heard very often, who tend not to, people tend not to come to a planning committee meeting and say, I would like a home, please. Yes, can you approve this application? I'm just wondering, in terms of homeless charities, council departments that have responsibility for the select move, for example, are we eliciting information from them? Both across Chorley and Preston. Thank you.
Point, Caroline.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, I haven't been directly involved with the commissioning of that survey, but I do know that there have been a number of agencies of that kind included within that. But what I can do is I can send you a list of all those who are included in that process, so that you can see the full scope of the study, if that would be of use to you, and then take any questions direct to myself back to the two teams that have been leading on that work.
You okay with that, Peter?
Yeah, thank you. That would be helpful. I mean, I know the closing date, I think, is the end of the month, isn't it? Something along those lines. But if we were to sort of identify one or two agencies or organisations that we hadn't contacted, can we do that after the closing date, or is because it's a piece of commission work, would that be it?
I'm sure we could add them in if they are something that we feel that would be valued. And if we need to give them longer to respond as a result of that, then that's something we can speak to the consultants who were doing the work for us. But hopefully, majority of those agencies or charities have been included in this work, because it is a fairly comprehensive list of bodies to be included. Has got all your housing associations, etc., those kind of companies as well. It's not just purely residents that have been contacted.
Did you?
Terrific. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Zoe, did you want to add something to that, Zoe?
Yeah, just to say that there will be, there are stakeholders being engaged in that survey, and of course the consultants will also look at the housing registers, the numbers of reasonable preference category, customers that are on those lists, those that are in housing need, and also the homeless preventions, temporary accommodation, etc. So all of that data is taken into account, but of course we can certainly check that the stakeholders that we want to be engaged have been, and of course add those if they haven't been so far. So yeah, definitely can look at that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other questions or comments? I think it's probably safe to say that we've probably been a little bit held up with elections and herders and all things COVID as well, again, coming back in another wave over the last few months, but hopefully we can get some more work undertaken so we have a more detailed or a more comprehensive update at the next meeting, and hopefully some more progress to move this process on. But I suspect we'll all be involved in that over the next few months. So thank you for the report, Caroline, and we note the contents. Okay, I'll be happy with that. In that case, we will move on to the next item, which is the planning reform update. Zoe, you're going to give the update based on what was happening till last Thursday, is that right? And then changes maybe afoot from there.
That's right. I mean, yeah, thank you, Chair. And I am conscious of the time, and I know we've got an external speaker tonight, so to make sure that they get the full time and we can all sort of get ready for the football, I will keep it light because I'm conscious of the time. So my aim is to give a light overview of my paper and then take questions. So it's worth saying there's still an absence of a lot of the detail with regards to planning reform and future changes to legislation. And officers obviously will continue to bring more detailed presentations to JAP members as and when those proposals are kind of given more detail and more depth, and also the impact of those proposals. So just in terms of the back sort of context to this, it was all linked to a big shake-up of planning to deliver the over 300,000 homes a year and to make planning quicker, easier and more digitally accessible. So some of the key points from the white paper reforms, if you'll remember, there were proposals for a zoning system with land categorised into 3 zones: growth, renewal and protection. And then some of the other big changes proposed are the end of Section 106 developer obligations and a replacement with a national infrastructure levy. So the community infrastructure levy would go and a new national schedule tariff would come in. Imposition of mandatory housing targets, and this is taking standard method a bit further and making them mandatory in terms of those housing requirements. New simple local plans, so there's going to be a streamlined process. Fast track for beauty. All new homes are to be zero carbon ready, and then the introduction of design codes. And a lot of that detail is kind of expanded on in the report. I'm just giving you the headlines here. The Queen's speech delivered on the 11th of May talked about the planning reforms and outlined plans for a forthcoming planning bill to deliver the changes with those key aims to create a simple, faster and modern planning system to ensure homes and infrastructure is delivered quicker, the digital transformation of our planning system and environmental infrastructure delivery. So the report then goes on to set out the benefits and the key elements of the planning bill on page 19 and thereafter, which we have provided information to you on previous JACs. So there's a bit more detail there in the report. So in terms of next steps, the key measures will obviously require further detailed consultation, which is what we're waiting for, as well as the passing of the draft bill through legal process. And therefore it's expected that it won't be implemented any earlier than 2022. What will be interesting will be to see the detail, but also how the recommendations of the Housing, Communities and Local Government Committee of MPs are taken into account. So this is a committee that reported on the 10th of June in a report. This isn't in my paper, by the way. This is just something I've just been looking at the last few days. They published their findings of their evidence review entitled The Future of the Planning System in England, and made some interesting recommendations back to government following the white paper reforms. And these are quite interesting. So amongst those recommendations were that the government should reconsider the case for the three areas and expand, at the very least, expand them into more detail because they felt they were too simple and wouldn't work. They also asked that the government reconsider the importance of public consultation at decision-making stage. So this is at planning application stage. So members will remember that the government was sort of saying that actually all of consultation will be front-loaded, and really then later on down the line, it will just be a very light touch consultation. The committee also said that local discretion should be given to councils to determine the percentage of affordable homes to be first homes. Now, this is interesting and it's detailed later on in my paper that actually that hasn't happened. They've already imposed that percentage on local authorities, unfortunately, so that decision has been made. But that was a recommendation of this committee. And then they also suggest that there should be a review into the green belt, whether it continues to serve its purpose and if the public fully understand it and what additional protections may be appropriate for the green belt. And then finally, the committee recommended that there needed to be an impact assessment of the proposed changes on historic buildings and sites. So quite interesting findings there, and it will be interesting to see how the government take on board those recommendations. So in terms of the new local plan, as Caroline says, we are trying our best to future-proof the work that we do. We're tying into contracts, for example, expecting contractors to take account of any changes and to flex the work as and when national policy or legislation changes. MHCLG have advised councils to continue with plan making, and that's what we're doing. In January 21, MHCLG said that it would publish the response to the Planning Future White Paper in the spring, and obviously we're in spring stroke summer now, so and preparing for legislation in the autumn. So whether that will slip, they did state that it would take many years to implement. So again, we're just waiting to see any news on that. The Chief Planner newsletter, which is issued to all local authorities in England on a regular basis in April, was silent on the time frame on referring to first home. So we just wait and see really on that. In terms of the next part of the paper, it talks about climate change and biodiversity net gain, or BNG for short. This is paragraphs 12 to 17, and that provides you with a flavour of the changes that are coming in. And the most relevant of those to local plan is BNG via the planning process, which will be introduced by the Environment Act. BNG is directly linked to the preparation of statutory nature recovery strategies, and a detailed consultation is expected this summer by DEFRA, along with draft secondary legislation, with mandatory BNG being put in place by autumn 2023. And this will bring new statutory requirements on councils, which will not only promote nature recovery, but also contribute to our climate change objectives. So it's very important, a very important piece of work. Councils will need to prepare for this and develop local policy and procedures for the delivery of BNG, identifying and managing habitat banks where our credits can be spent, assessing biodiversity net gain as part of decision making. So when planning applications come in, local authorities will need to assess the impact of that and what that looks like in terms of credits that the developer has to provide to make sure that nature isn't being adversely affected and we actually gain. And then also we're going to be required to monitor gain via a statutory national register. So obviously there's a key role for us and for the district council as well. The district council will have the responsibility for developing the local recovery nature strategy, which Carolyn touched on, and that will be the spatial strategy for nature for Lancashire, which will identify opportunities and priorities for enhancing our natural environment and where we can use these credits. So there's a lot of information there. I've not read it in detail around the BNG, but what I would suggest, Chair, is that for that particular aspect, that we will bring a session to JAP members. We'll have a presentation on it to give you more of the detail about that and how that will shape in terms of local plan and local delivery. And then the last part of my report talks about first homes. So this is paragraph 24 onwards. The Queen's speech was followed closely by a written ministerial statement which introduces significant changes to national planning policy with regards to developer contributions for affordable housing, and those are to come into force on the 28th of June. So first homes, you remember, was previously called starter homes, are to become the government's preferred tenure for affordable home ownership and must be provided by developer contributions and account for no less than 25% of all developer contributions. So First Homes is a discounted market housing scheme whereby market housing is sold at a discount of 30% or less to an eligible householder, and PPG provides a detail as to the framework of the scheme, although more detail is still expected, including model section 106 clauses and some of the procedure documents that councils will need in order to administer the scheme, because again, like BNG, First Homes will have a big impact on councils and will need to be geared up to operate the schemes. PPG sets out the transitional arrangements for decision making, and this states that for sites with full or outline planning permission in place or determined before December of this year, the policy does not apply. So therefore, we would still apply our existing policy for affordable housing contributions. And those determined before March 2022, where significant pre-application engagements taken place, also aren't affected. However, PPG does state that if an applicant wishes to amend a planning application to include First Homes, which is already being submitted and likely to be granted before those dates, the LPA should be flexible in accepting First Homes and as an alternative type of tenure. In terms of implications for local plan, no discretion is permitted to deviate from 25% of First Homes. So whilst we may decide to review our policy for affordable housing as part of the local plan and look at the mix and the percentage that we look for on sites, that mandatory minimum requirement of 25% will have to be reflected in any policy. Although we can develop local proposals with regards to certain aspects of the scheme, such as a percentage discount and the eligibility criteria. So those are the big sort of ticket items. I've just rushed through those, but I'm happy to take questions, Chair. And like I said, in terms of BNG, we would propose to bring a session, a presentation and a kind of workshop discussion around that at a future meeting, if that's what members would like. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. And a few things to consider there. Councillor Green had his hand up straight away. Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everyone. And thanks for the update, Zoe, which is really helpful. I very much welcome the biodiversity net gain that the government is putting on as a requirement for us. I think that's to be welcomed across central Lancashire. But my query regarding that is, will the 3 districts have the capacity to ensure that it actually does take place, and whether any consideration has been made into working collectively as a 3 or even on a bigger footprint to ensure that we make sure that we get the biodiversity that we need. I do have a further question, Chairman, but it's on a separate issue.
Okay, so I'll answer to that one first, if that's okay then. So, Zoe, Caroline, or is that a politician's decision?
I think in terms of resourcing, obviously, because it will be a statutory requirement, then we will be expected to make those arrangements. The government, as far as I can see, haven't yet said what support in terms of resourcing, burden support they will be providing to councils. They have talked about it for First Homes, and they are looking at that. In terms of BNG, I would imagine that we will receive some additional payments to help us put those mechanisms in place to do all of that work. And certainly in terms of decision making, there'll be a big impact on planning teams when applications come in. So I'd like to think that we will be geared up, and certainly in terms of local plan, then Caroline certainly already is engaged at a Lancashire level with that LRN work and preparing those policies. Thank you.
Do you want to take Caroline?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've been working with the Lancashire Nature Partnership, and there's a meeting again, I think at the beginning of next month, to look at how we collect data on there. But we've also been engaging, as Zoe says, of all of the councils, because we do need to produce these local nature recovery strategies, which will be one of the key mechanisms against which we monitor. We've also been looking at approaches taken elsewhere. So, for instance, Cheshire East is one of the areas where they've already engaged with their local wildlife trust, and they have looked at basically procuring land where they will deliver all the biodiversity net gain on for the area. So there are different options there. So where obviously some developers may not be able to deliver on the site, and the approach allows for developers to deliver the biodiversity net gain off-site. We don't want that going outside of the district, ideally, outside central Lancashire, at the worst case scenario, Lancashire. So to do that, we need to make sure that we've got sites available that can deliver that biodiversity net gain, and that's something that we are doing. But there will be policies developed through the local plan, and there's also, I understand, the requirement will be on county councils to produce those local nature recovery strategies as the higher tier authority. Now, they are currently looking at how they will resource that, and I am aware that there are a number of appointments being made at the county level to help resource that, specifically on the ecology side, which is something that we as districts just do not have that skill set in.
Helpful, thank you. Okay, Michael, was that sufficient of an answer?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Yeah, that's really helpful. Do you want me to raise my other question now? Or do you want me to bring
Please do not carry on.
Yeah, thank you. So with regarding the affordable housing, and I note the government's requirement that 25% of it be for first homes, but I think is it paragraph 36 in the document that I read? There's a split of the rest of the 75%. I think it says 70 as social rent and 5 as shared ownership. Is that stipulated nationally as well, or do we have discretion over that as Central Lancashire collectively? And if we do have discretion, do each of the 3 authorities have further discretion to vary it to cater for the housing needs of each individual district? Thank you.
Yeah, the answer is yes and yes. We do have that local discretion. So currently, our policy and core strategy sets out that split. So the imposition of this 25% of first homes, once that's kind of taken care of, then the rest of the policy applies. So obviously it would be the social rent and then 5% shared ownership. Now, obviously, realistically speaking, it's going to be difficult to deliver 5% shared ownership because any RP is going to come along and say, well, actually, we're used to a bigger share than that, and it's not going to be financially viable. So in the short term, that might cause us some issues. We may see some commuted sums. We may see actually a willingness to increase the social rented element slightly. But going forward, we certainly in that new policy can then choose to do what we want to do with the remaining 75%, if you like, of the pie in terms of the tenure split. That could be social rent, it could be whatever we want. But certainly, as long as the 25% is taken care of, the government are very clear that the remainder is down to local discretion and local policy.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, and just as a comment on the first homes and shared ownership, I think, while they're not a bad idea in theory and in the initial stages, the problems we've encountered previously with similar schemes in Chorley has been further on in the life cycle of the properties. So people being stuck in part ownership or stuck in premises that they can't move out of because they've got them at a discount and therefore they can't sell them on at a discount. So I'm very interested in the detail around this and what happens when it actually gets brought into practice, because it's not sort of the first move that's a problem, it's the second or third move down the line that tends to be the issue from our experience. And that's why, again, on behalf of Chorley, we think that the model around social rent and affordable rent is far easier for people to understand generally. And this aspiration for ownership is great, but it comes with problems down the line at times. And I hope that the government have thought this out. I suspect because the detail isn't there, they haven't. But we'll see, and we'll maybe see some examples coming forward in other areas, hopefully first, that we can learn from here in Lancashire, Central Lancashire. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this report from Zoe? It is a moving feast. It will change, I'm sure, as it gets filled out, and we will no doubt discuss some of this stuff in greater detail as it comes forward with more detail. Anything else? Okay. We'll move on. We'll have to note that report, so thank you, Zoe, and it was a useful update. The next item on item 8 is the exclusion of the press and public. I don't think we have any particularly on, but if we can exclude press and public, I'll move that. Can somebody just second that for the records, please? Thank you, Councillor Evans. Anybody against excluding the press and public? Councillor Green, you still got your hand up. Is that deliberate or is that a legacy hand?
Oh, sorry, it's a legacy hand, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay. A whole new word in the dictionary, the legacy hand these days. Okay, anybody against excluding the press and public? No, in which case we will turn off the live stream.